What's up, movie fans? Today, we're slicing into the dark, stylish, and blood-pumping world of Blade. This iconic 1998 film didn't just redefine vampire movies, it saved an entire era of comic book films. And today, we're breaking down 12 insane facts you probably never knew about the Daywalker himself. Grab your shades because things are about to get sharp. Asterix Blade wasn't just a superhero movie. It was a midnight raid carved from concrete and blood. A world where monsters are ready. Rand thinks, one man stepping in anyway? But behind the leather, the silence, the strobe lights, it was a fight over how dark the genre was allowed to become. One draft nearly turned Blade into a punchline. One casting move put the entire film on the line. One harsher cut was buried. Before the myth could breathe, these are 12 weird facts about Blade, where grit beat gloss, and the genre learned restraint. Welcome to the night. This is where legends learned pain. Number 1. In the late 1990s, comic book movies weren't hot. They were fragile. One bad release could poison the whole genre. You had films like Tank Girl, The Phantom Spawn, and Steel getting mocked or underperforming, and the Batman franchise had slid into loud camp and music plastic spectacle. Then Batman and Robin hit in 1997 and turned superhero cinema into a public joke. Studios did not respond with ambition. They responded with fear. The quiet industry mood was simple. Maybe audiences do not want serious heroes at all. Marvel was in no position to argue. The company's film reputation still had scars, and the business reality was survival. Characters were being licensed out because keeping the lights on mattered more than any grand plan. No shared universe talk, no confident roadmap, just one question hanging over everything. Can this material still make real money without being embarrassing? Blade answered it by refusing to sound like a comic book movie. It came in dark, violent, and music stylish. More horror and crime thriller than Saturday morning adventure. Wesley Snipes did not play a jokey savior in bright colors. He played a predator who hunts predators, moving through nightclubs, back alleys, and blood-soaked rooms like the world itself was sick, and the shock was not the tone. The shock was the result. It worried you about details. Critics could argue, but audiences showed up, and the box office spoke louder than the stigma. After Blade, the door did not swing wide open overnight, but it cracked. Soon came X-Men in 2000, Spider-Man in 2002, and a new belief that these stories could be grown, profitable, and taken seriously. And it all traces back to one image that studios could not unsee. A man in black leather walking into a club and the ceiling opening up like rain, only it was blood. Number 2. Blade did not enter Marvel as a superhero. He entered as a weapon. 1973, The Tomb of Dracula. Number 10. A horror book chasing the biggest name in vampire fiction. And suddenly, there is this new figure cutting through the fog. Not a cape, not a quip. A man built to hunt monsters in their own darkness. Writer Marv Wolfman told artist Gene Cohen he wanted Blade to be black, unmistakably heroic, and dressed in a leather jacket like he belonged in the streets, not a castle. The look pulled from real or toughness to with the vibe of larger-than-life figures of the era, including Jim Brown, and even surrounded by Dracula and gothic melodrama. Blade popped. He had a clean silhouette, a harder edge, and a purpose you could understand in 1 second. Kill the thing that should not exist. Marvel kept feeding that spark. More appearances, more myth, and that's the part that matters. He starts showing up as Blade the Vampire Slayer in Marvel Presents, then gains serious momentum in the 1990s through bigger storylines, including Ghost Rider before landing a solo run in 1994. By then, the character's tone was locked in. Half horror, half action, all menace. Some of the art even leaned into the creepiest religious imagery of the era. The kind of gaunt, preacher-like nightmare that sticks in your head long after you close the comic. And that's the part that matters. Blade started as a side character in a Dracula book. Then he kept stepping forward until the page had no choice but to give him the center. Number 3. It is almost impossible to picture now, but Blade came dangerously close to becoming a joke. When the project landed at New Line Cinema, the studio had a horror legacy, but it also had a temptation. Make it lighter. Make it wink. Turn the vampire hunter into a parody, and sell the concept as a gimmick. David Music's Goyer came in to write it, and the fight was immediate. Goyer had already been around genre filmmaking, and he understood the trap. If Blade laughs at himself, the audience never fears anything in his world, and the whole character collapses. So, he pushed the script towards something stricter, darker, meaner, a story that treats vampires like a real infection, not a punchline. What makes this moment wild is what it turns into later. Around that same period, Goyer was also working on Dark City, another film built on shadow, mood, and hard reality inside a strange world. Then, years after Blade proved the formula could work, Goyer would help write some of the biggest modern superhero movies, including the Dark Knight trilogy and Man of Steel. But it starts here, with a single decision that could have gone the other way. One studio wanted a spoof. One script refused to blink. Number 4. When New Line started casting Blade, it wasn't a normal superhero decision. This wasn't a cape. This wasn't quips. This was a vampire underworld movie wearing a Marvel logo like a hidden blade in its sleeve. If the lead didn't feel lethal, the whole thing collapses into cosplay. That's why the final conversation circled three names with real weight. Denzel Washington, Lawrence Fishburne, and Wesley Snipes. All three could command a frame, but the script needed more than gravitas. It needed physical credibility. David S. Goyer pushed hard for Snipes because Snipes didn't have to pretend he could fight. He moved like a trained weapon. Quiet menace. Discipline. A man who looks like he's already decided how the night ends. And Snipes didn't take it like a job. He took it like a workaround. For years, he'd been trying to get a Black Panther movie made and kept hitting a wall. Studios weren't ready. So Blade became the back door. A black Marvel hero. On a big screen before Hollywood wanted to admit it was overdue. Snipes didn't just star. He came in as a producer, shaping the tone from the inside, pushing the movie toward adult intensity instead of comic book cuteness. Then the rest of the cast had to match that seriousness. Whistler went through its own shuffle. Mark Singer was considered, but the role ultimately landed with Chris Christopherson, giving the mentor a colder, harder authority. Not a cuddly father figure, a man who feels like he's been living around monsters long enough to start sounding like one. In the villain path was chaos. Deacon Frost was first offered to Jet Li, who turned it down to do Lethal Weapon 4. After that, names floated like a wanted board. Skeet Ulrichs, Mark Warburg, until Stephen Dorff locked it in. And Dorff's, Frost wasn't ancient evil. He was a young insurgent, arrogant, modern, openly disgusted by vampire tradition. The perfect clash against Blad's disciplined control. Even the supporting casting carried consequences. Karen Jensen was originally written with a white actress in mind, and Snipes pushed back. The film already had cultural weight. He wanted the world to feel broader, more music honest, more lived in, and the henchwoman Mercury went to Arlie Jabor, a model with limited acting experience, because Stephen Norrington valued physicality over resume. She didn't need monologues. She needed to move. Blade wasn't cast like a superhero. It was random. It was assembled like a Dow. Pick the weapon, pick the handler, pick the threat, then lock the door behind you. Number 5. Blade looks like it was shot in some forbidden industrial underworld. Steel, shadows, concrete that feels permanently wet. But a chunk of that vampire city was actually built inside a warehouse that used to be a Redken shampoo factory. Same walls that once mass-produced hair products now holding blood-soaked corridors and nightclubs that feel like a crime scene. Stephen Norrington was still an outsider choice, too. An English director with only one feature behind him, the ultra-violent cyberpunk horror Death Machine. He started filming Blade in 1997, bouncing through Los Angeles and Death Music Valley, then funneling key set builds into that repurposed factory space. It's the kind of filmmaking contradiction Blade thrives on. Cheap, grimy real estate turned into a world that feels expansive and dangerous. And after the movie hit, Norrington got the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, and then his directing momentum basically stalled with that notoriously rough Sean Connery experience hanging over his reputation like a curse. Number 6. On-screen, Blade and Deacon Frost feel like they genuinely hate each other. Off-screen the vibe wasn't exactly friendly either. Stephen Dorff's first days on set were tense. He showed up nervous, still trying to find the rhythm of Frost and Snipes, tried to help him, but it didn't land like support. It landed like pressure. Then it got worse. Big-name visitors like David Fincher dropped by the set, and suddenly Dorff wasn't just performing. He felt watched, judged, measured. Snipes acting not only as the star, but also as a producer, pushed Dorff to trust him and lock in. Dorff pushed back. Different styles, different energy. The result was real friction to the point Snipes later admitted that for a while, there just wasn't trust. But here's what makes it work. They didn't have to become friends. They just had to keep that tension sharp enough to film. And somehow the strain didn't ruin the movie. It fed it. Number 7. Pearl is one of the grossest sights in Blade because he feels like a nightmare that somehow got permission to exist. The immobile vampire, the swollen body, the smug little face trapped inside all that meat. But what made it to the screen was already the clean version. In early drafts, Pearl wasn't just disgusting. He was written as genuinely monstrous in a way the movie didn't want to stare at for too long. His size had a cause. A sick appetite. There were ideas for a lair that didn't just look filthy. It looked like evidence. Corpses. Hearts. A visual punchline that was too dark to even be funny. One abandoned concept went further, placing a young boy across Pearl's stomach just to underline the horror. That's the version they backed away from, because even in a vampire action film, it crossed the line from hard R into why did you write that? And then they built him anyway. No CGI safety blanket. Pearl was a fully practical machine. Actor Eric Edwards wasn't slipping into a suit. He was being installed into a mechanical body like a component. A platform, a hydraulic setup, a step-by-step assembly where other performers climbed in to operate the arms. The lift locked into place, and only then did Edwards' head get attached to this enormous creature. 45 minutes to an hour just to assemble the monster, and a few minutes to tear him apart again. So, Pearl hits like a gut punch for a simple reason. The script may have blinked first, but the creature didn't. He was physically there, waiting under that ultraviolet light like the movie's ugliest secret. Number 8. Blade already feels like a movie that lives at midnight. But the version that got cut was even deeper in the shadows. They filmed scenes that would have pushed the story closer to horror, lore, and long-term sequel mythology, then trimmed them away to keep the film moving like a knife. The biggest missing piece was a sequel hook that didn't whisper. It pointed. After Frost goes down, Karen offers Blade a cure. Blade refuses because the thirst isn't his problem. The world is as they talk. A presence watches from above. The reveal was Morbius, the living vampire sitting on a rooftop. Like a predator, waiting for his turn? It was billed as the next chapter, a clear handoff. But once Stephen Norrington exited and the franchise shifted direction with Blade 2, that tag stopped fitting the future, so it vanished. Other cuts were quieter, but they changed the spine of the mythology. One deleted exchange finally explained. Blade sword, not as a cool accessory, but as inheritance. Whistler was meant to reveal it had been his first pot, passed down through generations of hunters, a weapon with history baked into the metal. Keeping it out preserved Whistler's mystery and kept the movie from pausing to lecture. But it also erased the idea that Blade was carrying someone else's war. Then there was the cut that leaned hardest into body horror. In an extended version of the lab sequence, Karen discovers a hybrid infant-like creature floating in a tank. A glimpsed music of experiments gone wrong and what Frost's obsession was really producing. The moment was designed to shock the audience into silence. Music. Test screenings reportedly found it too much. So, the film pulled back before it derailed its own momentum. So, the final cut stayed clean and fast. But underneath it, you can feel what almost made it through. A Morbi future, a Hunter legacy, a monster in a tank. Blade did not just trim scenes, it trimmed nightmares. Number 9. Rewatch Blade now and it hits with a weird deja vu. Long black coat, cold industrial lighting, guns and martial arts stitched together like one language. A hero who moves like the room belongs to him. A hidden system running the world while normal people walk around smiling, clueless, and already conquered. The stories even rhyme. In Blade, vampires don't just exist, they operate like an invisible government. They feed, they profit, they control the night, and the average human never even suspects the leash. Actor Eric Edwards wasn't slipping into a suit. He was being installed into a mechanical body like a component. A platform, a hydraulic setup, a step-by-step assembly where other performers climbed in to operate the arms. The lift locked into place, and only then did Edwards' head get attached to this enormous creature. 45 minutes to an hour just to assemble the monster, and a few minutes to tear him apart again. So, Pearl hits like a gut punch for a simple reason. The script may have blinked first, but the creature didn't. He was physically there, waiting under that ultraviolet light like the movie's ugliest secret. Number 8. Blade already feels like a movie that lives at midnight. But the version that got cut was even deeper in the shadows. They filmed scenes that would have pushed the story closer to horror lore and long-term sequel mythology, then trimmed them away to keep the film moving like a knife. The biggest missing piece was a sequel hook that didn't whisper. It pointed. After Frost goes down, Karen offers Blade a cure. Blade refuses because the thirst isn't his problem. The world is as they talk. A presence watchers from above. The reveal was Morbius, the living vampire sitting on a rooftop like a predator, waiting for his turn, who is billed as the next chapter, a clear handoff. But once Stephen Norrington exited and the franchise shifted direction with Blade 2, that tag stopped fitting the future, so it vanished. Other cuts were quieter, but they changed the spine of the mythology. One deleted exchange finally explained. Blade's sword not as a cool accessory, but as inheritance. Whistler was meant to reveal it had been his first. Passed down through generations of hunters, a weapon with history baked into the metal. Keeping it out preserved Whistler's mystery and kept the movie from pausing to lecture. But it also erased the idea that Blade was carrying someone else's war. Then there was the cut that leaned hardest into body horror. In an extended version of the lab sequence, Karen discovers a hybrid infant-like creature floating in a tank. A glimpse music of experiments gone wrong and what Frost's obsession was really producing. The moment was designed to shock the audience into silence. Music. Test screenings reportedly found it too much. So, the film pulled back before it derailed its own momentum. So, the final cut stayed clean and fast. But underneath it, you can feel what almost made it through. A Morbi future, a Hunter legacy, a monster in a tank. Blade did not just trim scenes, it trimmed nightmares. Number 9. Rewatch Blade now, and it hits with a weird deja vu. Long black coat, cold industrial lighting, guns and martial arts stitched together like one language. A hero who moves like the room belongs to him. A hidden system running the world while normal people walk around smiling, clueless, and already conquered. The stories even rhyme. In Blade, vampires don't just exist, they operate like an invisible government. They feed, they profit, they control the night, and the average human never even suspects the leash. In The Matrix, the leash is digital, but the feeling is the same. A small resistance fighting an oppressor most of the world cannot see, even the vibes match. Underground clubs, secret layers, late-act hostage, chaos. And there is a split second, in Blade, where a character narrowly slips the path of gunfire in a way that feels like the early sketch of the bullet. Dodge image that would soon become iconic. Here's what makes it cooler. It is not theft. Blade hits theaters first, but The Matrix was already written and designed on its own track. The overlap comes from the same late 9 South fuel source. Cyberpunk mood, Hong Kong action, rhythm, anime energy, and that growing cultural obsession with hidden control systems you cannot argue with because you cannot even prove they exist. So, when people say The Matrix changed action forever, remember this. Blade fired the first clean shot into the dark and the rest of Hollywood heard the echo. Number 10. When Blade hit theaters in August 1998, the mood around comic book movies was still nervous. This was an R-rated vampire action film built around a Marvel character most people couldn't name, so expectations stayed cautious. The surprise is that the audience did not. On a budget of about $45 million, Blade clawed its way to roughly $131 million worldwide, turning what looked like a niche gamble into a real hit. It even opened strong overseas, going #1 in markets like Australia and Music Spain, and it played especially well in Europe, with France standing out as one of its best territories. For something this violent, this dark, and this specific, those numbers landed like a shock. Reviews argued about the script, but the movie's confidence was harder to deny. Wesley Snipes' presence, the fight choreography, and that sleek nightclub to back alley visual identity made it feel sharp instead of silly. It picked up Saturn Award attention, too, including nominations like Best Horror Film. But the real award was simpler. Blade did not need universal praise. It needed proof, and the proof showed up in cash. Number 11. Blade wasn't supposed to have a long life. An R-rated vampire movie built around a character most of the public didn't know should have been only and an experiment. But the box office didn't treat it like an experiment. Music, it treated it like the start of something. And once a studio smells
But
momentum,
after the first
it
two
doesn't walk
Blade
away.
movies
It
became
builds.
massive hits,
That's how you
Wesley
get Blade 2
Snipes
in
started to
2002
lose
with
control.
Guillermo del
He
Toro
refused to
taking the
cooperate
wheel
with
and pushing
directors,
the world
insisted
deeper
every
into
close-up be
horror.
done with
More
CGI
myth,
or
more
a
of
stunt
that
double,
underground vampire
and wouldn't
society
even
feeling like a
respond
real
unless
infection
people
spreading
called
under
him
the city.
Blade in real
It wasn't
life.
just a sequel trying
His
to copy the
obsession
first
soon
movie. It
spiraled
was
into
proof the
real-life
film could evolve
trouble,
and still
tax
hit.
evasion, legal
That made
battles,
Blade feel
and a
less like
total
lucky strike,
career
more
collapse.
like a machine that could keep
Then
running.
there's another one.
Then came Blade Trinity in 2004, and you can feel the franchise shifting again. Bigger cast, bigger attitude, new hunters, stepping into the frame like the series was trying to widen the doorway for what came next. Reception got messier, but the message stayed clear. The character was strong enough that Hollywood kept betting on him anyway, and they didn't stop at theaters. In 2006, Blade the series hit Spike TV with sticky fingers as the Daywalker, dragging the concept into weekly episodes like the story was too restless to stay inside one movie format. So, the real legacy isn't just Blade got sequels. It's this. Once he kicked the door open, the industry kept chasing that same night. Different directors, different tones, different mediums, same hunger. That's what happens when a movie kicks open a door that never closes. If Blade still pulls you back into that world, the tone, the danger, the hunger, you can bring it home through the links below on Blu-ray DVD or even 4K. And if you're a superfan, the full run is waiting there, too. Thanks for the support. It really means a lot. Now, let's head back into the night. Number 12. After Blade proved the Daywalker could own the screen, the next step wasn't bigger explosions or brighter hero vibes. It was the opposite. Make it tighter, meaner, more dangerous. And in 2000, that instinct became a handheld game simply titled Blade. It didn't play like a superhero victory lap. It played like a night shift where every mistake cost you small spaces, quick fights, enemies that don't feel like targets. They feel like problems. You move room to room, like you're clearing a building, not saving a city. And the pacing stays tense because the game keeps whispering the same message over and over. You're strong, yes, but you are not untouchable. That's what made it work. It wasn't trying to turn Blade into a cartoon. It turned the world into a trap and forced you to survive inside it. No victory parade, just the hunt, and the constant feeling that if you get careless for even a second, the night wins. In the end, Blade didn't endure because it was respectable. It endured because it felt dangerous. You walk in expecting a vampire action movie, and you walk out realizing something shifted. The lights went colder, the heroes got harder, and comic book movies stopped asking music permission. That's why people still talk about it. Not for the story, not for the mythology, for the feeling that the night has rules. And Blade is the one thing in it that never blinks. So, which fact caught you off guard the most? Drop it in the comments. Tell us what film we should hunt next, because we're not done walking in the shadows, and those were 12 killer facts about Blade. If you enjoyed the breakdown, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and tell me which movie you want next. Thanks for watching. Now go keep the vampires in check.